Just remember that, lads. There's a small bit of a needle there.
But come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Listen back to England, and now they're really rolling. And I can tell you, that there won't be a cow milk in County Clare for at least a week.
Hello everyone, you're very welcome to the Irish Examiner Gaelic Football Show in partnership with Allianz. My name is Paul Rouse and I'm joined by the former Mayo footballer and manager James Horan, by the former Kerry footballer Bryan Sheehan, and by Maurice Brosnan, the senior sports writer with the Irish Examiner. The Allianz League is up and running. It was a fascinating weekend of football. We're going to talk about all four divisions of the National Football League, and later we are going to talk about the ongoing saga of the All-Ireland Club Football Final. I want to start, James, with you. You're very welcome. What was it like? Did you go to Castlebar yesterday?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I did. Went in and got a seat in the stand. Knew I had to be there early because I know what the Mayo public are like and how early they get to their game. So brought a couple of the kids with me and hopped in there. Good occasion. Great crowd, great atmosphere, and parts of the game turned out to be really exciting. So probably a fair result in the end, Paul. I would think.
Yeah, we'll talk about the actual game itself in a minute. What did it feel like to be there though and not involved?
Let me think. Really weird, I'd say, is probably the best way to describe it. I was dropping one of my daughters she was going to a sleepover for the night during the day. And so I was going through Castlebar around 1:30 in the day. Now, remember, the game was at 7:30 and there was a lot of Mayo shirts knocking around at that time. So when I saw it, straight away my head kicked into pre-game meal, what needed to be said before the meal, where the players were probably meeting. So my head went into sort of game mode and prepping for it. But so as I said, got in there, and I suppose I forgot what it's like to be a spectator, I suppose. And I was in the thick of it with the other 15,000 people that were there, and just the noise and the volume and how emotions can swing from good to bad within the space of one hand pass. It was just so you get caught up in this sort of wave that goes on. So look, it was very enjoyable. Headed downtown with a few of my old buddies that I haven't had a drink with in about a decade after a football game. So good night out. Good night.
So it's back in civilian life, basically.
Back in as normal a life as can be. Absolutely.
And it was a hugely enjoyable game of football to watch on television. At least, was it the same there?
It was funny because I watched it back that night. It looked a way more intense on the TV and faster on the TV than it was at the game, if that makes any sense. It started off well, but there was long periods of the game where there was a very cautious approach from both teams, I thought, and how they attacked. So there was a sort of a no man's land in the middle of the field at times, where there was a lot of passing that was without purpose. I thought, so slightly sideways. But then interspersed with that, there was periods of brilliant football, brilliant point scoring. I thought some of the points Galway got in the first half in particular were really good, really well crafted, and really well taken. And then, of course, Mayo started very well in the second half, and towards the end, then it got really exciting. As any game is, that's really close. There's going to be excitement in there, because it could go either way. So there was a full mix of everything in the game.
Maurice, you were up there as well, I think. Weren't you reporting for the Examiner on it?
Yeah. I thought it was like, I agree with James totally. I think it's modern football sometimes ends up being 5 minutes of a frenzy and then 5 minutes of kind of nothing. Like they're just kind of not for a bit. And that's the way certainly the first half felt a good bit. It probably feels like a new phase for, I think, both teams actually. Like you look at the Galway defence that started, the three debutants playing, there's a good chance all three, in the absence of Liam Silk and Kieran Malloy, will be needed come championship. So you've got a guy like Daniel O'Flaherty who joins the squad last year. I'd actually held his own really well. Neil McCahey is in a similar level. From a Galway perspective as well, I think you do have to take consideration that you're only getting 8 Moycullen players were in the squad for this game. They only came back in post-Christmas. you've got a Citizen Cup going on at the minute, which was actually cancelled on Tuesday, so they don't train on Monday, expecting to play on Tuesday. They actually can't even train on Thursday because the game is moved to Thursday, so they go a week effectively without training with Galway. So that taken into consideration. I don't necessarily think the style questions. I do think, Paul, like a lot of the takeaways from this weekend that even I'm just seeing this morning in some of the papers is it's a bit of a stretch. Like I to be honest, I saw no real change from the way Mayo played last year. I don't. It's despite the fact that Conor Loftus did play at 6 or that kind of thing. I saw no change in style. I did actually, James. I did kind of want to ask you, like the idea of that, maybe the label of Horan ball, for example. That the phrase, or even that phrase, and the perception that it needs to change. Like, what was your thoughts on that? Because I think you're gonna hear a lot of talk about the style we see over the next couple of weeks and that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of it is nonsense. Like there's no justifiable evidence of it. So instead of talking about the change that we have seen, maybe the overall scheme of what we might see is a more worthwhile conversation.
Yeah, it was interesting. Look, there's no question Mayo generating power and generating energy from their half back line has been a huge source of threat for the team for many years. And I think some of that will stay. But your point, it was very interesting to see what the philosophy was almost of both teams, how they're approaching it. And look, it's very early days, so there's going to be loads of mistakes and loads of changes and defaulting back to the way they've all that sort of stuff goes on in the first couple of games till patterns emerge. But I definitely thought there was probably more numbers around the middle from Mayo and maybe quicker to get into a defensive position. Jordan Flynn around the middle, Jim O'Connor there, and they were dropping. Jack Carney was dropping quite deep at times. So there was a lot of strength around the middle that were probably a 20 to 30 yard from a positional sense deeper than maybe what the approach I would have taken. So there was definitely some sort of structural or positional changes there that were trying to probably strengthen the defense, and then you could see trying to transition as quickly as they possibly could. With the option of looking up to see what, and Ryan was winning huge ball inside. So that option, is that on? If not on, then the supporting runs go. So there was definitely a little change there. I would say trying to maybe, because there was so many new debutants, as you said, with Dave McBreen in there, Jack Coyne was in there, a lot of new guys there. So maybe that was factored into some of the decision making as well.
In terms of Galway, there's been huge turnover in Galway for a team that was in an All-Ireland final and very close to winning an All-Ireland last year, Maurice. And will you talk to us a little bit about what Pádraig Joyce has been doing?
Yeah, like I was actually writing about this for the Examiner on Saturday, and I do think it is interesting when you tot up. Like I'm still bleary-eyed from looking at Excel sheets from every single player. I went through the 34 games Pádraig Joyce has had under Galway before last weekend, and just looked at the amount of players he'd used. So the 70 different players doesn't sound like a lot, but then you think about before that, I think Kevin Walsh was up near 140 players that he used as well. So the turnover, it's always been an issue in Galway. Like the turnover is absolutely massive. But then you look at the amount of, on top of that, like the 3 years of a phase, and let's say if you totted up the top 15 players for minutes played under Galway, and 3 of them we're probably not going to see this year. In Fionn O'Loy's gone to Australia, Liam Silk has gone to New Zealand, Kieran Malloy towards Cruciate. On top of that, then it looks like there's no confirmation yet, but the soundings is that Rob Fernie did the same ankle that he did in 2021 against you, actually, James, in the Connacht final. So if it's the same injury again, he's going to be out for, unfortunately, a guy who's in a lot of form. So that's 4 players of your top 15. You're suddenly talking about a new rebuild, effectively, and I thought that was interesting that Pádraig Joyce came back for 3 years. But that was what the announcement was when he came back this stage. I do think there's a huge scope for. He threw open the door. Like they had a massive squad for the FBA League. I think they're down to about 40 now. But there's a long-term element to all of this, and then there's what we're seeing now with this Galway team. So it is arguably having to rebuild his defence. Definitely going to have to do something. The only positive from the weekend is that the 3 All-Stars from last year all seem to pick up where they left off in terms of McDade, Comer, and John Daly. I thought they all looked excellent again. At the same time, then, Paul, like there's a separate conversation to all of this, what's going on in the short term, which I think is interesting, which is what's going on in Galway as a whole. And I do, just from a county board perspective, the back end they've got there, the changes in training structures and that sort of thing, which I think was coming a long time. It's funny, right? I was at Friday night there was a Mutual in Galway. It's a business partnership for Galway GA, which is they're launching the opportunity to come on board for other businesses. It's a new revenue stream effectively for Galway GA. They launched it on Friday night in Galway, and I was there. And actually, the MC stood up at the start and he said he could do it. There's a legend. It's a meal thing. They bring up legends on stage, and Joe Canning and Michal Meehan, and they do interviews, and both managers were there. But the MC at the start stood up and he said, I could do a great kind of conference interview here, or I could do a boring TV interview. So if everybody agrees not to say anything about what happened in this hall, I'll do the first one. He wasn't going to do the TV interview, which I thought was an interesting thing for an RTE presenter to say. No, I have to say. But anyway, so I'm not going to say much about what was said there, obviously. But one thing that I did think was interesting was Paul Bellew, the Galway chairman, stood up and he said, and this is something he said previously, that when he took over as Galway chairman, one thing he promised himself was that over his dead body, would anybody ever be able to say again, was the county board to blame? Like, they'll never say this was because of the county board. So anything that they could provide, they would. And like James, to your credit, I actually thought you never brought it up, or even when we asked you about it after games, you never really engaged in it. But it had to have been a factor for your Rangers, for example, the difficulty to source training fields, the issues with the surface in McHale Park, all that sort of stuff. And that's all been totally resolved within Galway GA. So they've got manageable debt. They've got an improved training facility. The long-term prospects for Galway are very promising. But within all that, I kind of see a bit of short-term pain in terms of trying to rebuild this squad and trying to bed in all these guys, like 3 guys who've basically walked in without a huge amount of exposure to senior football. There's inevitably, I think there is going to be a small bit of pain there. So long-term prospects, I think, are very good for Galway and for this team. But I do think in the short term it'll be interesting. It's a new rebuilding job, effectively.
James, what do you see when you look over the fence into Galway?
I'd agree with a lot of what Maurice is saying there. Like, the talk was that Mayo had a very young and inexperienced team out on Saturday night, but I suppose so had Galway when you weigh things up. So while Pádraig Joyce would be in Pádraig's unique style would be very, very cross after the game and how they lost it or how they didn't win it, I suppose. He'll be very happy with some of the debutants, and again, as Maurice said, with some of the senior guys. Damien Comer, I thought in the first half he's such a threat. In the air, and he's such very good hands. So overall, they'll be happy. They're very good, young players coming through. Jack Lynn, they have probably through Cian O'Neill, he's been obviously with us. He was with Kerry, Tipperary, Kildare, Cork. And through his career, he's obviously a highly qualified and knows, I suppose, what's needed around high performance. So I think him joining Pádraig in the backroom team, and as Maurice was saying about Paul Bellew, that they've definitely got their stuff together. I think down through the years we would have felt we'd always, we would have had the edge on them. Maybe physically from an S&C point of view and a prep point of view. Certainly we use that as a strength of ours. But they definitely have caught up, as a lot of counties have, I think, because there for a few years, maybe from 10 years ago, there was 4 or 5 counties, in my opinion, that were ahead of the rest in terms of
way ahead
and the commitment and effort, etc., they were putting in. There was other counties that maybe were crying a little bit. They didn't have the resources of this, that, and the other, but some counties just went after it a little bit and pulled away. But I definitely think you're seeing now counties, a large number of counties that are prepping very well. I think Galway are heading that, and they're going to be. Galway are a very good team. We saw them last year, and are going to be very strong with what's coming through. With their under-20s, etc. And now the structure that they have in place, plus the confidence that they got. From last year's, the win over Armagh, I think it really, they just said, right, and maybe back to the win over us, the point win in Castlebar, I think it definitely gave them a huge surge of confidence, and they kicked on from that. So, with Sean Kelly and the Mike Cullen guys as well, he's a very, very good leader. So they've a lot of pluses there at the moment, and where they're heading.
Before we move on to talk about the other All-Ireland finalists and Ultimate Champions, Kerry. I want to ask you, James, you referred to Pádraig Joyce's unique style there. What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
I'll let you look. You guys are
Go on, Paul.
you guys are following Pádraig, so Pádraig's very much his own man, and very clear. I think he's very frank in how he deals with the media and his interviews after a game. I always find them interesting. He said, it reminds me of Davy Fitz a little bit in some of his interviews. I'm not going to say this, and then he does say it.
It's kind of great, though, isn't it? It's kind of great that he's straight out.
Oh, absolutely. Look, what the GAA needs is characters and people that are, I suppose, unique or authentic. It adds to the mix in there. So Pádraig is certainly that.
And are you friendly?
I wouldn't say friendly. We had a lot of battles down through the years for during management, and I suppose we won most of the important games. So maybe that didn't put me on his Christmas card list. That sort of happens. But I don't know how many intercounty managers are friendly.
That's a question, though, isn't it? Like, do you get on with, like, do you have a relationship with, say, Jack O'Connor or with Jim Gavin?
I suppose you would, yeah. Like Jack could be a good fella to deal with. So I know him. After I retired, it was one of the first calls I got was from Jack, just wishing me well. So very good. I suppose there's a couple of managers. Colin Collins actually be a guy I'd had a huge respect for and great time for, and we'd always sneak down to Clare very early in the season and have a couple of challenge games against Clare. We've done that for years because they're very honest, really well organized team, and Colin a great guy to deal with. So we do that, sort of away from the crowd, and so it'd be huge respect for Colin, and you'd know the other managers. I remember rooming with Glenn Ryan out in Australia in '99 on a trip, and all that kind of stuff. So there's connections through football there. You'd be in touch with some of them, but there's obviously managers, in the heat of battle that you mightn't say that much to them after a game or in the weeks following, So.
But it's very similar as a player. Like, I mean, when you're playing, at the end of the day, you're and I found, maybe I was just the odd one in this, but I've heard since a few fellas were in the same wavelength as me. You're against players, you meet them at certain events, or you're doing a Munster final thing for media thing. You're going out, this fella is trying to win what you want to win, or this fella is trying to take you off a pedestal, and I find it very hard to be all nicey pally with fellas. And it's presumed the same as managers, James. Yeah. You're knocking the door there trying to beat Kerry with Fitzmaurice on one side, you're trying to knock on the door with Jim Gavin. We're trying to knock on the door with yourselves and against Dublin. I mean, I don't think I was ever pally with those kind of players, because they were all trying to take what I wanted, and I didn't want I don't know if that was just me, and I would think maybe I'm the odd one in that, and it could very well be my personality. But I think since I've retired in, you get way more relaxed, you're not as intense, and you're there for not having to talk to them, give something away, or give something that they might use. You might say something that they might use to beat you with down the line. So I find once I kind of retired and stepped away from it, if you meet these people, then it's very easy to open up to a conversation with them, and all of a sudden I think both people then are a bit more relaxed. So I think when you're in the firing line and you're in the thick of it, you don't want to give something away. You're very cautious of what you're saying. You're trying to get one over them. And I think all of a sudden then, once you're kind of step away from it, I think you that perspective kind of comes out, and fellas ease up a bit and allow a bit more engagement in conversation.
Bryan,
100%.
Kerry, did you think Kerry would lose on Sunday?
I did, to be honest with you. I thought they'd probably lose more than by a point, to be perfectly honest. Just with the sheer volume of bodies are down, and particularly in the forward line. I was above in corners myself during the week, and I said to myself, if I was in any better shape, I might get a call to go in, because they were lacking numbers. They're just down a serious amount of bodies. Do you know what I mean? I think when you take like Paul Gainey, he's in his 30s now. I don't think he's going to be going through a full campaign from league right the way through the championship. You obviously have the two Cliffords, Paddy and David, who are only just finished up. Shawnee Shea played a lot of football last year. I think he played the majority of the games in the league right through Championship, played right up into the semi-final of the County Championship. So I think, Kerry are trying to probably mind a couple of those fellas. I don't think they need to burn the candle, but burn them, and all of a sudden when you need to kick off them in Crow Park or later on in the Championship, that it's not there. So look, they're just down. I suppose the players they're missing are all big key players. I think that was what you saw above in against Donegal yesterday. You're up 6 points, and I think if you had the senior players that were there, I don't think that they wouldn't have been defeated. And I think that's what happens. They had a lot of youth, a lot of newcomers in the side yesterday, and above and belly buffet is a hard place to go, regardless, even with a full team. So I suppose they would be disappointed to lose, having been 6 points up. I know Johnny scored 3 points in the last 15 minutes of the first half, and then the whole of the second half is disappointing. And I think that's where Jack would be absolutely livid. The fact that you're up there, you're 6 points in the lead above and belly buffet, and to come out and lose at the last kick of the game would be very disappointing from that. But I think if they look back on it, going up there with the squad they have, I don't think it would have been a game that they would have asked or been looking to take 2 points from.
Will it be in Jack's head that Kerry have never won the All-Ireland under him without winning the league?
I doubt it.
Is he a man for pitchhogs in that area?
No, but it's funny how you kind of say he's a man for pitchhogs. These things just these things seem to happen. Like every time that Tyrone won the All-Ireland, Jack O'Connor's come in as a Kerry manager the following year and won the All-Ireland. These things just happen, and he happens to win the league the same times as he wins the Championship. It's just these things. It's
nothing more than that.
It's nothing more than that, I think. But I will say that Jack does put emphasis on the league, because I recall when we were playing under Jack, and it was around the time whenever you did well in the league, and I think if you look back through the years, people that succeed in the league or go to a league final are nearly always thereabouts come Championship, or always nearly knocking the door at an All-Ireland semi-final and the final. And I think that's the difference with the old system, is that you were playing football right up until the age of the Championship. We were playing competitive football, whereas if you didn't qualify for the league semi-final or final, in Kerry, we could have been waiting 2 or 3 months for a game of football. And you're training and you don't know where you're at, and you're just undercooked going to a Championship game. Whereas if you contest the league semi-final, got to a league final, all of a sudden there's 4 weeks of extra competitive football you're playing. It just stands well to you then coming to the Championship. So he did put great emphasis on the league, to be fair, but I just think this year, after coming off the back of the All-Ireland, missing the Cliffords, Paul Gainey with the age he is, David Moran after retiring, I just think now, for me, it's about don't get into a dogfight for relegation, win your home games. I thought, even looking back yesterday, you could have said, yes, 2 points up in Donegal would have been a fantastic result. I don't think they would have expected it, but in the position they were, being 6 points up, I think they'd be furious to leave it after them. But for me, I think with Kerry is unearth a few more players if they can. Just try and keep building on the squad. Obviously, David Moran is after departing in the middle of the field. Big shoes to fill, even from the point of view of, it's an extra body you need to bring into the middle of the field now and get up to speed of inter-county football. So from that point of view, I just think they just need to find 1 or 2 players in the league, keep tipping away, and don't find themselves in a relegation battle. And if that happens, if they find themselves inside in a relegation battle, all of a sudden you're knocking on the door of Paddy Clifford and David Clifford and Sean Shea and said, lads, I need you back ASAP. And all of a sudden their gap or their recovery period is after reducing. So I think that's the last thing they want.
It's interesting though, isn't it, for a team to be looking for so many players, central players, early in the season, because it's clear that there's going to be a midfield issue for Kerry in the coming year. Do you see the answers being there?
At the moment, no, it's just one of those areas that had been light. I think Kerry have been very lucky, and I suppose I kind of put myself, it's detrimental from my point of view, that we always seem to have an array of midfielders in Kerry. I recall my time playing there any night in training, you're against Anthony Maher, you're against David Moore, you're against Johnny Buckley, or against Donaghy. You could have played 4 or 5 different fellas in the middle of the field, and now all of a sudden you're just kind of lacking that extra bit of quality that's there. It's after coming down to Jack Barry, Adrian Spillane might play there. Just bringing Mark Green from Rathmore's coming in, Rory Murphyers can play there at times, but they're relatively young, we're lacking inter-county experience at that level. And in fairness, the midfield is probably one of those areas in inter-county football, I feel, where you need experience. You need to have the physicality, and you need to have that kind of bank of training put into the legs to be able to sustain 70 minutes of football, because that middle eight in intercounty football is it's the war of attrition. It's continuously up and down the field, taking hits. So it's a big area. Are they there? Look, I think you just have to give it time. I recall talking to Mark O'Shea recently, and I think I heard him again on the radio. Kerry had Jacko, and we thought we'd never replace Jack O'Shea. Then all of a sudden, we got Darragh O'Shea, came into the fray. He kicked on, and all of a sudden, then we found David Moore, and we found Anthony Maher. So look, I think give it time. These fellas just need a bit of time, and probably just missing the fact that if they were there a bit earlier to learn from likes of Davis, have a kind of a forward figure there that could guide them along a bit more experience would have been great. But look, David owes nothing to Kerry, and unfortunately he had to step away. Life doesn't wait for him. Family matters, work. When you get to your 30s, that's what happens. And look, I think they'll find someone, but I think it will be one of those areas I think that will be of concern for Kerry going forward.
Maurice, Roscommon beating Tyrone would have surprised quite a number of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly me. I have to say, you're looking at Roscommon at the start of the year and you're thinking of David Burke coming in, making some very interesting comments, I thought, about the general level of fitness of his squad. The loss of Ultan Harney, who I thought, to my mind, was one of the best midfielders in Connacht last year. Conor Devaney's retirement, and it looked like it was a fairly significant rebuilding job. And all these players who, anybody's watching, the Sigerson Cup this year would have seen maybe the likes of Ben O'Carroll playing for UCD and that, but to see them, how quickly they seem to be coming up to speed was impressive. I would add, Paul, it's funny, I was listening to your conversation there about Kerry and Donegal, and while all of it is certainly pertinent, and I fully appreciate why Bryan might mention the idea that Kerry are fighting off relegation. Kerry did start last year with a draw in Newbridge as well, and didn't seem to struggle too much after that. So I would just take it with a pinch of salt, the games at the start of the year here versus what we saw, and definitely kind of overreacting to any of these results. Now, that's not to talk down Roscommon's results or talk up Kerry or anything like that, but I just think I would definitely take a lot of this with a pinch of salt. But yeah, from a Roscommon perspective, you fly out of the blocks the way they did, and then to see Tyrone coming back, and I genuinely, with the win behind them, thought that game was only going to go one way, and Roscommon managed to rattle off goals. One thing I'd be really interested to look back on, and I'm sure I'll get time to eventually, is if you talk to performance analysis now in GA, a lot of them talk about their buzzword is breaches. A lot of teams talk about breaches now, which is, it's kind of a very generic enough term, but it's just about your ability to. And I think a lot of the goals we're seeing in Gaelic football now are very similar. I would say, if you look back on Sean Kelly's goal, look at Killian O'Sullivan's goal for Meath, look at what Murtagh did for Enda Smith's pass for that goal after the free, the way he ran that kind of runner from deep, the way how well timed that is. None of that's not happening by accident. This is all planned, it's coordinated stuff. If the last decade was defined by a lot of innovation around the way teams are defending, I think we're going to see that now in the way teams are attacking. So that's one thing I'm really curious to see. I'm really interested to see what teams are going to do with centre backs this year. I looked across the board there. Every team seems to be. You were at the Dublin game. I know we're going to come to that, but to me it looked like John Small was up in the forwards. I know Merchant was actually playing at 6. Darren McVeety played at 6 for Cavan. You look back on last year, Ronan Wallace for Westmeath was one of the stories of the year. John Daly from Galway had 5 assists from centre back. And I think that's what they're doing going forward, as opposed to maybe Conor Loftus is a perfect example as well, what they could bring in attack as opposed to in defence. So that's one thing I'll be interested in. But I'm reluctant to draw too many overwhelming takeaways from any of these games, I suppose.
It's much too measured, Maurice. The modern way is it's instant risk to judgment here.
But you know what? It's Maurice makes a good point, because the way football is at the moment, a lot of it is gone defensive, and you have a lot of half forwards line, tracking back the field and defending, and it makes perfect sense to play a forward, someone that's going to be capable of coming up from centre back and half back line kicking scores. I mean, you look what Armagh doing a bit to the extreme with Rafferty and goal, but the game is kind of coming to that point of view that if it's about, before it was, for me, it was all defensiveness and all defensive coaching, but now I think teams are working on different ways of breaking that down. And it's just going to be interesting how they're going to do it.
It's interesting though, there were 30 goals across the 4 divisions over the weekend. So on the same weekend last year, there were just 24. So 30 goals on the weekend, which is more than any weekend last year from what I could see. My maths isn't great, but that's the best I could do it. And that's a lot. That's a lot of goals to be conceded in a game which is supposedly ultra defensive.
Yeah, but I think you just, as you mentioned there, like I think teams now are really working on how to break it down. Because I think over the last couple of years has been the kind of the go-to for a lot of teams of defensive structures, and you hear all this talking about defensive shape and this kind of stuff. I think now teams are really working on how to counteract that. So you see,
is it attacking, James? Is there a lot of work being done on pre-planned moves, attacking shape, all of that?
There always is, but a lot of the goals I would say that were scored at the weekend were defensive mistakes. So like you take Sean Kelly's goal, against Mayo. Kenny McDade was soloing across the field. Now you could argue that there was no shape or pattern to anything, but he held on to the ball and just soloed across, and basically the Mayo defense just drifted out a little bit, didn't cover the square. And it was a simple hand pass and in, and even Enda Smith's brilliant left-footed pass across Murta. Where was the defending there? Like he took that on the, inside the 20-21. So you can have numbers back, but it's what's your defensive read and what job is you are doing there. Even in the Kildare Dublin game, we'll come to it. Those, in front of the goal was left open quite a lot. So there's a lot of work done on the defensive setup, and you can see. And just the point I want to make is back to Maurice's point. The first round of the league is a complete lottery on multiple fronts. Like I used to always laugh at, oh my God, Horan is trying out an experimental team today in the first league game. I had no other players. There's so many injuries. You leave the Sigerson guys alone. Yeah. There's the older guys are in bits from the last season. I don't want to see you till the end of January type thing. So you have all this kind of stuff. So it all depends. Like how did your county club teams do last year? Did they get out of Connacht? So if they got out of Connacht, that means you're going to leave them for a while, basically. Yeah. But if you didn't get out of your province, then you can bring those guys in. So there's how many guys have you in Sigerson? You might be lucky. You might have none. Or you might have 5 or 6, and you might have them in UL, you might have them in DCU. So it's just a mix of everything. So to your point, Maurice, I don't know what you could dig out of the first couple of games. It's usually, after the first 2 games end, there's a couple of weeks break, and you want your stuff to start taking shape a little bit for your third game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's what you're looking at. I'm sure Kerry have Mayo in the third game up in Mayo, have they? Yeah. I'm sure Jack will be looking to get a couple of this, because you want to start getting stuff in order then, because the season type of it is. So I suppose the point I'm making is people are looking for shapes and patterns and all this kind of stuff at the minute. It's an absolute just a mess of everything.
It's a great point though, James, about players and being injured and tiredness. Like you lost Tommy Conroy last year, early in the year to Sigerson. I think Owen McLaughlin picked up injuries as well during Sigerson. I looked at the matches over the weekend, and being at Dublin Kildare, it's an amazing thing to say at the start of a league, but I thought there was a lot of tired players around the place. And part of it is, I know, the heavy training, part of it is Sigerson, part of it's pre-season competitions. How do you go about trying to manage that?
Lads, and I'm sure we'll cover this at some stage, but the seasons that we have now, the split season, and for a player that. And I'd always like to think as a manager that we did our best for the players and supported them. If you're a player now and you look at the season that you have now, if you're a club player, you're going to be happy because there's a split season. You're training in January. I see clubs. I live here beside Bravely Pitch, and they're training down here on the pitch in the middle of January, and they're having a serious game till when?
September. They might play in September. Big game in September.
That's soulless. That's soulless for a club player, but. What you're expecting from intercounty players? Again, we mentioned Sean Kelly earlier on, right? Think of the last 18 months that guy's had. Won the Sigerson Galway, straight in, intercounty season, got to the All-Ireland final. Mike Cullen, the run right through the All-Ireland semi-final, and he's straight back in now to a league campaign, and he's their mainstay. He'll be playing there. where there's no.
I'm playing Sigerson quarter final this weekend.
And he's already playing Sigerson
this Wednesday.
So it's just insane. And look, we've squeezed the season tighter, and we put 30 more whatever inter-county games in there. Something's going to break. Something's going to break. So anyway, but we
will come back to that. But it is a basic point. In the next 21 weeks, if a team does middling well in the provincial championship, doesn't get to a league final or anything, but just survives in the league, middling well in the provincial championship, and gets to, we'll say, the semi-final of the Tailteann Cup or the All-Ireland, or even the quarter final, you're looking at 15 or 16 matches in 21 weeks, and that's a pretty significant output. Armagh beat
Paul, can I ask one question to James just before we move off that? James, when you look back on how last year went and the gap between the league final and the first round of the Connacht Championship, and you've got, I think, Mayo are in a similar situation this week. If they were to make a league final the 1st or 2nd of April, the first game is a week later in the Connacht Championship. Would you want to make a league final if you were Mayo manager this year?
It's like, would you set? That's a hard question. Yeah, would you set out to win it? You'd set out to develop, and you'd be trying to try different players at different things, and you'd see how that'd go. And depending on how you do in your first couple of games, you might have enough scope then to change and try and develop and try other things, which may lead to you losing a game that you could have won. So it all depends how it goes and how things are going for you. And that all depends on how you start off in the league. The first couple of games, you need to get some points. You need 2 out of your first 4 points. You really do, or else you're sort of tightening up, and you have to be set. Yeah. But if I was a new manager going in now, and I'm playing Roscommon a week after a league final, the league final could be a distraction in that regard.
Paul, I think that's so relevant for this season particularly. You look at teams like Armagh who are out in the Premier League Championship in Ulster a week after. Do they really want to be playing in a league final before that? I think there's a big factor. If what we saw this weekend, and I don't get me wrong, was very entertaining, and a lot of teams are maybe surprised at how their open round of the league went this year versus last year, I do think you might see teams, if they get a win or two on their board or start to get comfortable, that kind of 6 points, that magic number, you would see a lot more experimentation towards the back end of the league with a view towards championship. It's something that it's one to put a circle around, I think, definitely towards the latter round of the league.
Get yourself in a position where you're not going to be relegated, hold in the middle, and then kind of rotate your team.
Exactly, yeah.
We'll be coming back to talking about Monaghan Armagh in the coming weeks. I thought it was a good result for Armagh to start with a window, and I think it does put Monaghan under the pump straight away. And I think they've Kerry next weekend, which will be a tricky for them. But I want to talk about Division 2. I think Derry had a really comprehensive 16 points to 4 win over Limerick, fairly routine. It was very interesting. I think that Conor Glass and Ethan Doherty from Glen played for Derry. It shows you as well the premium Derry are putting on the league. I also, again, no surprise, Clare beating Louth, even though Louth were ahead for a lot of the game. Never really felt that Clare were going to go. Clare, it's bizarre to me that Clare have not been spoken about as potential promotion candidates in that league. They've been kind of almost dismissed as if this is a shootout between Dublin, Derry, and Kildare, maybe with Cork and Meath behind them. I see Clare right up in that mix. But I want to talk about 2 games in particular: Dublin, Kildare, in Croke Park, which Dublin won by a point, 11 to 13 points, and Meath, Cork, Meath winning 3-14 to 19 points. I want to start with that game actually, James. I see Cork and Meath as being very similar in standing, although a little bit ahead, I think, of Mayo when you took Mayo over the first time. And a note that Colin O'Rourke has gone into Meath and that Kevin Walsh has gone into Cork. And I think Kevin Walsh is a brilliant coach, brilliant organizer, puts a defence together. And then Meath go down and score 3-14 on them. How would you see that?
Yeah, that's a brilliant win for Meath going down there and for Cullum. And what a win like that does, scoring. They were full of energy, they were full of enthusiasm. You could see it. You know, that really solidifies a team and a group. You know, when there's a new management in, and you know you're used to hearing a different voice, and then this guy comes in, you mightn't fully believe everything, or you mightn't fully, you know, just question. But then when you have a win in a performance like that, it's amazing the bounce Meath could get from that. It puts him in a really strong position for in Division 2. You know, and I just on Colm, I think Colm O'Rourke will do really well with Meath. Again, listen to his interviews. Interviews are they can be very telling, even though there might be much said. It can be very telling. I just thought his approach and the way he's looking at it, and his honesty in it, I think he's going to get a real kick from that team. And again, just back to the point I mentioned earlier, he was over the compromise rule teams I was on in '99. I know, like several meetings at that, and there was lots of trainings and that kind of stuff. I just thought, as manager, I thought he was really, really good on that. I thought he was really good the way he talked to the players, the way he went about things. So I'm gonna follow his progress with real interest. But a great win for them. And you know, Shane Walsh and a couple of the guys, how they played. They'll be bouncing off the ceiling this week. You know, looking forward to the next game. Cork. Again, from what I saw, from you mentioned Kevin Welch. It takes Kevin, you know, when he was Galway brought in a defensive sort of strategy, I suppose. And it took like anything, that takes time. That takes time for players to get it, or to know the positional sense. And you know, you're probably going away from man-to-man marking to more zonal, and where do you sit, and when do you engage, and when do you drop back to cover greater risk, all that kind of stuff. That takes a lot of process and a lot of games to figure out, to be honest. It can be a very difficult thing. Man-to-man marking can be the most straightforward thing in the world, right? He comes into our half, you take him, or whatever it is. But then if more zone, so there might be that. And I felt in some of Meath's scores yesterday, Cork sort of stood up. There was one in particular where Ian Maguire, not picking on Ian, you know, a great midfielder, but he just stood up and let the guys went past and went through the middle and ran pretty much ran the length of the field and kicked it in. So the way the players' body language after that score looked like they weren't sure what they were doing, or what. It wasn't my fault. You know, that kind of vibe sometimes you get off different groups. So I think they have a long way to go. They have a long way to go. But I tell you what, Division 2, you better learn very, very quickly, because what a division that is this year, you know, and there's big teams coming hot and fast in that league at you. So they're going to have to tighten up. They might have to maybe simplify defensively before they get the real one. I mean, maybe simply go man to man and put one or two or whatever sweepers if they need to do that to get themselves started. You know, make it simple for players maybe, and then build from there to where you want to go. But yeah. Interesting times.
Yeah, I agree with you there, James, on that, from the point of view. Like, I mean, Cork, if you go back over the last couple of years, they started playing Michael Powter as a sweeper, and that was kind of
Sean Powter,
Sean Powter, sorry. And you know, that was kind of it. That was their tactic. They doubled up on David Clifford a couple of times. They were doing the same during the league last year as well. Now all of a sudden, it's a brand new system to come into, and you, like, I mean, as James said, you can't just flick a switch and get that going overnight. And it's a case of understanding, communication, getting fellas talking to fellas, getting fellas to pick up runners, getting fellas to sit back and hold. You know, that takes a massive amount of communication, and that's what it comes down to in the field, is and understanding that, you know, that if you pass on a fella, you know, he's going to be covered, and there's trust in this. And like, this is the first league game of the league. I mean, this kind of stuff takes teams 2 years, 3 years to get right. So, like, I mean, this isn't something that Cork, and this is where you need to be very careful from the point of view of, like, as you say, Division 2 is such a minefield now at the moment, that you finish mid-table there, you don't know whether you're going to play in the Sam Maguire or you're playing in the Italian Cup. So, like, Division 2 is just going to be an absolute minefield, I think, from that perspective this year, because there's teams that are going to go up. And look, I think being realistic about it is, I think you have to put Dublin in the bracket as one of the teams that are going to go up. I just think they're Division 1 side through and through. They're all Ireland contenders every day of the week. So I think they're going to go up. I think it's going to be the next one after that's going to be the massive scrap for the next position. And even going back to Meath, again, Colm O'Rourke has come in. it's an extremely young side. He's gone through the whole county looking for players. He said from senior to junior to intermediate clubs. And again, there's a lot of youth inside in that team. But again, it's going to take time. And I mean, at the end of the day, that youth as well is going to come up against a big physical team that's developed and there's 2 or 3 years ahead of them. And they are going to come unstuck. So again, all that stuff with Meath, with Cork, it's going to take 2 or 3 years before they get and find their feet and get themselves ready to have a cut at something. So look, Division 2 is going to be a fantastic league. I think it's probably going to be the one that most people will be watching.
Kildare against Cork, 2:00 in Newbridge next Sunday is already a massive game.
Yeah,
it's an
absolutely
amazing thing to say this about round 2 of the league, and I totally take the point from James and Maurice earlier about teams finding their way. But I think that applies more to Division 1 than it does to the other divisions. I don't think there's any room in 2, 3, and 4 to be looking for a team at the moment. This is hammer down straight from the beginning. The
Paul,
possible
Cork are like, I hate to play this caveat again, like, but Cork kind of are doing it. You look at UCC went to penalties last weekend. I think only one, Marsh Shanley, is the only player from that UCC who played at the weekend for Cork. Colin Mahoney came on as well in the last 10 minutes, but otherwise there was none of them were involved. Conor Corbett, every single league preview, lads, that you, no matter where you read it, the young player to watch, Conor Corbett, he wasn't even in the squad because he's coming back from a very serious injury and they're managing him. He's also playing serious in football. This is the same thing that Cork are doing again. I actually thought they definitely were lacking something else alongside Sherlock.
Yeah,
like particularly if you're going to run everything, I just don't think that necessarily suits Brian Hurley. Like Sherlock is so good at coming on the loop like that. Corbett actually was a similar player as a minor as well. But the second that game started, you were looking at kind of 3 matchups, and you were like, you were questioning about all 3 of them. Like Hickey went to Sherlock, Kevin Donovan went straight over on the other end onto Shane Walsh, and Sean Powter went to 11 on Donald Keown. And like, I know what Brian meant in terms of that it was a fairly one-dimensional element of their defence last year, but I still think Sean Powter is at his best when he is that extra man as playing as a 6, and let Sean Meehan, who was playing 6, push back again. So there's a lot of scope for, like, if you look at key principles of the game, Cork, I think they were over 70% on their kick-out. They destroyed Meath's long kick-out. Like O'Donovan and Niamh Maguire are unbelievable fetchers around the middle. Now I know McGowan took a bit of punishment and had to come off for a blood sub and that kind of stuff, but there was a lot of what they did was really promising. Their big issue is that they conceded the same chance over and over again. You look at Killian O'Sullivan's goal, you look at Cathal Hickey's point a second later, you look at Campion's chance in the first half, that brilliant double save by Micheál Martin. It's the same thing. It's the same thing that's happening over and over again. So I think that's where what James is talking about there in terms of when, you know, if that's a runner from deep and you're being told to, Kevin Walsh's thing about filling all the lanes, you know, you divide a field into 1 to 5 and you're trying to track all these runners. If it's not somebody's job and you're only starting off with that system, it's inevitable there's a lot of wires getting crossed and things falling apart. So I do think that the scope for Cork now, like, what do you do? All those boys are still playing Sigerson this week. What do you, like, for example, would we see Conor Corbett in Newbridge, the scope that comes into that? That'll be really interesting. Someone like Brian Hartnett. Like, there's a lot of, I think the pressure that comes in, particularly what you're talking about there, Paul, is pressing. So I'd be very curious to see the team Cork pick for this weekend.
Yeah, and as well, it'd be interesting to see what Kildare do too. I was in Croke Park. I thought Kildare were much better this year than they were last year. I thought it was a serious match. It was a serious game. I thought Dublin were okay. I thought they were the better team. But I think there's a really interesting thing to watch from the first half, the last day. And I know Dublin have been defensive in the past, but there were periods in the first half yesterday where Dublin had everyone in their own half. They didn't even have Con up. Sometimes they left Con up with Cormac Costello, but other times there was actually everybody in the Dublin half, and they were trying to run, like, break at enormous pace. Other times when Dublin had Kildare pinned in and were passing the ball back across, defensively they set up with 2 markers inside, and they had Owen Merchant playing as a sweeper at the top of the D. And then they kind of shifted away from that for a while. And you picked it exactly right. Johnny Small spent a lot of time up the pitch, and he kicked a great point in the first half.
Yeah.
But I'll come back down to it. The one thing you could say about Dublin when they were in their pomp was that Dublin were the most skillful team in the country. I know they're incredibly fit, but they had a range of players that were incredibly skillful. And I don't think you can say anymore that Dublin's skills are better than any other team. I thought they gave away the ball easily particularly in the first half. And I know it's the first game of the league. I know you're going to say that, but they gave away the ball. Their handling was relatively poor. The decision making wasn't great, and only one Dublin's forward scored from play in the first half, which was Niall Scully with a left-footed shot from out the field. And that's a fair thing to say about a Dublin forward line. Did you notice anything different on them, James? Did you when you looked at them?
Yeah, I think your point on the skills is a good one, Paul. People forget when Dublin were at their peak, you do very well to pick out a mistake in their game, and by mistake I mean a skill error or a misplaced hand pass or a foot pass that went astray or what. Their execution of the basics, I think, is what set them apart.
I agree.
They made zero mistakes. It was unbelievable. It was football at a level that had never been played at. I think that level of execution. So they were phenomenal at that. And then they had their system and how they played. And look at and Bryan knows as well as the sprinkling of top class players, some of the best players ever in the game that they had as well. So they had a potent mix, but they had their shape and how they attacked and how they played, and then they had line breakers like Judgement and Paul Flynn and all these guys that could just break a line whenever they needed. So that became very set, and they actually nearly overdid that towards the end. I think, in that they became sort of too preoccupied with taking the absolute right shot that they nearly overpassed at times. So it was very interesting to see how their method changed. But I think it's changing now. I think the few clips that I saw was very evident how they were trying to get, they typically go down this side. So you have two runners that go out the far side so that, within three passes, they're going to get at the far side. And you could see their halfbacks and even midfield waiting out and holding, till the first or second pass is played, and then they time their run to come in. Brian Fenton's goal was sort of a version of that. So they're definitely trying to, their space creation is what they sort of pride themselves in. So they create that, and then they have the runners coming. So again, back to Maurice's point, if you have too many people ahead of the ball, you're actually defending your own attack. Yep. There's too many bodies there, whichever way it is. So how I see the game evolving is that you have people now, they maybe have two, maybe three max ahead of the ball once you go into the opposition half, and it's timed runners coming from each flank, and probably two coming each side of the ball that come through the middle that create the options. As opposed to, like, if you have people in front of the ball with their back to goal coming out towards you to take the ball, it's easier to defend the way teams are setting up now. So I think what you're seeing is that evolution where the runners are coming from deeper at very specific times that create sort of confusion in any defence. So look, I agree with you. I thought Kildare were good. I think they're getting better under Glenn. I think they look strong. They have threat now. Yeah,
Jack Robinson was very good. Jack Robinson was a big addition.
Yeah, I thought he was really good. He's got strong and he's pace now, and he's confidence on the ball. I thought he was really, really good. And Highland in there as well. So they have threat. Maybe previously you wouldn't. You'd fancy yourself to outgun them, outshoot Kildare, but now they have threat. And they look strong, so it's going to be interesting. That, like, next weekend's game now against Cork,
it's such a massive game. It's such a massive game for them.
Yeah.
We're going to break down Dublin a little bit in the coming weeks, and the thing. So, but we'll move to the big one in Division 3 quickly. I mean, it was obviously a big win for Offaly up in Antrim in Corrigan Park. It's a great start for Offaly. Surprise down, obviously a goal win over Tipperary. I think the victory of Cavan over Westmeath was the two teams that played in the Tailteann Cup last. Really fancied Cavan to win that. Westmeath were down injured players who were only just coming back and will get stronger as the league went on. But the surprise in that company was Fermanagh beating Longford, who had won the O'Byrne Cup, and it makes Division 3 next weekend. Again, fascinating, even though it's week 2. Westmeath and Longford, a local derby, and whoever loses that is in trouble. Westmeath in terms of promotion, and long it'll be gone from then as well. And if you go into Division 4, Wexford drawn with London, Carlow not being beaten, or Wicklow not being beaten in Carlow for the first time since the 17th century or something like that, managed to come out of it with a point. Big result for Carlow there. Leitrim hammering Waterford, and Sligo being well beaten at home by each. Like, already you get the feeling that there's teams moving who are, their season is already on the line in the next couple of games. So the way the league works is there are this next weekend second round of matches, then there's a break for a week, there's 3 matches, and then a break for a week. So this is very little time to fix things. And if you're a player, Bryan, and you lose the first league game or the second league game, what does it do for morale in a team?
Well, I suppose, look, that's the point I was trying to make earlier on with Kerry. Like, if they lose the second league game, all of a sudden they are looking in a dogfight, especially Division 1, because it's so competitive. And that's then where you're turning around and you're knocking on the door of David Clifford and Paddy Clifford and Shawnee Shea and Paul Gainey, and trying to get these fellas back. And all of a sudden, it's I suppose it's not called panic stations, but I suppose what happens then is, it kind of is to a certain degree panic stations, because at the end of the day you're trying to avoid going to be relegation, and it's kind of, the morale is low, and there's a bit of panic happening around the place, there's a bit of anxiety around the place, and it puts pressure on fellas having to perform. And I suppose that what happens then is you have to go back to the tried and trusted, and Jack's going to go back to the fellas that he knows he can trust, the fellas that have won the All-Ireland from previously. And all of a sudden the newcomers' confidence starts slacking. They're getting taken off, they're not getting game time. Then you're questioning, are these fellas up to it? Clearly maybe they're not up to it because we're not winning. But very hard for young fellas to come into a group. And I suppose you can see this throughout every county. And James mentioned there that you want to give certain fellas a chance to develop and give them opportunities playing to county football to see if they're up to it. Then you're trying to mind the older players who have a lot of mileage on the clock. You have fellas that have played football, a lot of football throughout the year. And it's just a difficult time for all teams, because they're trying to build at the start of the season, trying to find a few new bodies, and all of a sudden results don't go your way and the pressure is mounting. And it's difficult, and that's where then you have to go back to your tried and trusted. I can imagine if James is above and there, you're going knocking on someone's door to come back in and need you back in straight away because things aren't going well for us. It even happened to me back in the time when I was playing with the club. We went to an intermediate final in Crow Park, and we won that. And I think the following weekend, I said the Wednesday night after that, I got a phone call from Memphis Morris. Can you please come up to Down? We're after losing the first 2 league games. We need to get a result above and Down. And all of a sudden you're back into the fray of it. And that's what happens. And I think, especially for those players, and I found it difficult at that summer. And I think we talk about Sean Kelly there, that's the amount of football he has played in the last while. And he's back playing serious football, back playing into county football at the moment. My concern for him is when the summer comes around, has he got that extra gear, that kick to go, because he's had no break? And I recall back in 2016, that's what happened to me. When we came to that stage of the All-Ireland quarterfinal, semi-final, you get to Crow Park, training goes up, the intensity goes up, and I couldn't get that kick because I had such a long year prior to it. So I could be the concern for teams who are resting players, fellas coming back from injuries. You're going to push them on, and all of a sudden, I think when you really need them down the stretch, I don't think they've had the recovery. I don't think they've had the work done or the recovery, or they're not at the pitch of the game where they need the rest and recuperate, exactly. And then all of a sudden you're looking to build your panel, and you look at Galway, they're trying to find a few bodies. All of a sudden, if these fellas aren't getting game time, you're coming down the stretch in the All-Ireland semi-final. Well, can we trust him? And this is where the question marks come in. So it's a tough period of time, and that's why I think that it's nice if you can win one or two, your first or 2 league games. It just eases the burden. You can relax a bit more. The pressure isn't on you. You can try a few new things. You can keep trying one or two players, and it just makes life a bit easier, I find. I know, James, you probably have a better idea from the point of view in being in the manager's seat, but I think from the player, that's my overall perspective, having been inside it. Yeah. It
can be a tricky one, because usually at the beginning of the year you'll say, look, you keep communication open. So you say the following players will be joining us. This, and this. Because of this reason. So a long club campaign. But then if you lose your first 2 league games, if you have no points going into that break, you're probably ringing those players to bring them back in. But you've said to the group that you weren't going to bring them in, so that spread in itself starts to spread panic. Oh God, the manager might be panicking. That spread, So there's all those things. So it can be a tricky one to get right for sure.
We're going to leave the intercounty game and just for a few minutes talk about the club saga. Glen, Waddy Graham's, again, Kilmacud Crokes. Maurice, we're recording this on Monday morning. What's happening?
Good question. Both clubs are going to meet officials in Croke Park tonight. It sounds like the reality, Paul, is, as I'm sure you know, this could drag on for weeks and weeks. Do people realize that? Because I hate to keep bringing this up, but just because Croke Park, or because the CCC didn't intervene originally, under 6.44, we're now in a different subsection. So because we're talking about objections, and within those objections, the best piece has been written about this saga from the moment it started was bias aside, was Jack Anderson in the Examiner on Saturday, and he just spelled out the farcical nature of the GA rulebook and how it came to be that because the CCC didn't intervene, they left it up to the clubs to object. What that meant is that we're now in just a different category. We're into objections. So this could, it is feasible that this is in front of the DRA in a month's time. That's an option, because to my mind, the biggest issue in all this was that they left a void. There was no sense of leadership. They didn't grasp it. They left it up to the clubs to resolve it. So whether or not you agree or disagree with what Glen have done, what Kilmacud have done, I think personally, I think there was a void left there, and that's why we've descended down this. So people are surprised this is dragged out for a week. It could drag out longer. There's every opportunity it could drag out longer. I actually think if there is a resolution, for what it's worth, it'll come from the clubs. It'll be one of these clubs who decide, no, we're not going to proceed with this, we're not going to play, etc., etc. That's the only resolution for in terms of getting a short term or getting something in the relative short term resolved. But otherwise, this is going to drag out. And personally, I think it's going to drag out because there was a void left. There was a lack of leadership. Nobody was willing to grasp this nettle and take the issue on. So, and that's why we are where we are. It's
and a complete abdication of responsibility, really, when it came down to it. I think it was wrong to put the emphasis on Glen first of all. And I understand entirely why Glen objected in the circumstances the way they did. I also understand why Kilmacud Crokes are coming back and saying what they're saying. I totally understand that as well. What I don't understand is how it was allowed to get to this. How it was allowed to get to this impasse where 8 days after the playing of an All-Ireland final, the most important club day of the year, the pinnacle of the club game, 8 days after it, this debacle is ongoing. James, what's your view of it?
It's a complete mess. But I'd hope that tonight's meeting, my understanding is that the two representatives from both teams are going to meet with the GA tonight. That's my understanding of it. So you'd hope that would be a facilitation session there, that it's just brought to a resolution. I think to your point, Maurice, that both teams sort of say that, look, it is what it is. Let's sort of move on. To be honest, I hope that's the case. I don't think either team wants to play a replay. I don't think a replay is an option. Shane Walsh out in Australia, he's done. Kilmacud have come out and said that they don't want a game. And Glen, you know, with the two guys playing for Derry at the weekend, those guys just probably wanted to get back and play football, wanted to move on from the saga. So I don't think there's any of the teams want to play it. I completely get what you're saying, Paul. I understand why Glenn threw in that objection. Almost, you know what? Here, you back into your court now, guys. You should have sorted this out in the first place. You know that sort of feels.
That's exactly right. I understand. I think that's why they did it. I think they kind of said you should have fixed this, and now here you are, fix it.
Absolutely. Unless if the issue wasn't like an issue like this happens in a game, if it's not sorted during the game,
yes,
or you know, if the game is over and the presentation is given and teams go separate ways, I think it's done. I think you have to, you know, in sport and in games, there's hard, sort of hard luck stories or stuff that happens to you that shouldn't happen, and refs make mistakes and umpires make mistakes and there's mistakes. I think you nearly sometimes just need to take it on the chin and move on. And I think the Glen, I'd be awful surprised if that wasn't what the Glen players. I know Malachy Rourke came out straight after, who's a very guy of huge integrity, came out straight away and said, and I think if I was in that situation, I'd be the same. Move it on. What can we learn? The hierarchy, the GA hierarchy here were an absolute shambles in how they dealt with it. I think that's without question. So there needs to be, that's where it needs to be solved. The fourth official that's on side, what's his job? 2 on, 2 off, whatever it is. There are no players or no team did anything wrong here, in my opinion. So it's the GA need to take this one, sort it out, learn lessons. Hopefully the 2 teams can resolve it tonight and move it on, and let's kill this and learn from it,
But I think that's the only way. It was a pure and utter just lack of leadership, in my view, from the GA to let this rumble on this far. And I don't know. I seriously question myself at times with the GA how they're running things. And look, it's for another conversation for another day, because I think there's a complete and utter lack of leadership from the point of view that everything they do is reactive. From the point of view with rule changes or something wrong to Gaelic football, what do we do? Or we'll introduce the mark. We'll just do something for the sake of doing something. And I think the same thing happened here. No one actually took a bit of leadership and said, we'll deal with this. Oh, look, we'll just see how it festers out and hopefully it'll go away. There's serious lack of leadership inside the GA. Look, I don't want to get started now, because if I get started, I think some of the stuff that goes on inside there, they're not. I think some of the people inside the GA, to be honest with you, are not fit for purpose from the point of view that, and I hear this, back in my day, this is what we did, but back in the day. And I think that's the problem. There's too many people inside the GA making decisions that were playing football back in the day and haven't moved on with football and where it is now at the moment. And I think we see as a result of where we are now with that at the moment.
We're going to come back to this issue. I'll just leave it on a point of history. In 1887, the first ever Cork senior hurling final wasn't finished because of an objection. The same year, the Limerick senior hurling final was abandoned. There were 2 county boards set up after it. 2 Cork teams went to Dublin to play a match, claiming to be Cork champions, and so on. We imagine that we've changed. The objection is one of the great things in the history of Gaelic football and hurling. And we haven't really quite managed to get on for it. I'd like to thank Larry Ryan for running this podcast. I'd like to thank Raf Rocca, Jack Neville, Tony Lean, and everyone at Examiner Sport for their help. Thanks to Allianz for their support and partnership. A huge thanks to James Horan, very welcome to the podcast, to Bryan Sheehan, to Maurice Brosnan for joining us today. B'Éimead Turnash Galua.
Remember that, lad. There's a small bit of a needle there.
Come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Listen back to Eden.